Okay, welcome to handling many-to-many with Entity Framework. A little demo for you. So I was trying to think of something, and I don't know why this silly scenario came into my head, but I'm sticking with it now. That a player, a baseball player, basically, can be assigned to use many different bats, and a bat might be used by many players. There might be some bats that he's not authorized to use. I don't know if that's real world or not, but we'll pretend it is, okay? And then just for contrast and compare purposes, I also threw in a one-to-many here, so the team, a team has many players, a player is on one team. So here's my quick crude diagram. I didn't have any better tools to use at home here, so this will have to do. Now, first thing I'm going to say is, look at this right here. You lied to us, you'll tell me. And I'll say, yes, I did. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. Anyway, yes, in class I told you. Because students, as soon as we taught you many-to-many, students wanted to come to the board and draw an arrow with, sort of a line with an arrow at each end type of thing, or a crow's foot, actually, of course, at each end, indicating a many-to-many. And I would say, no, you're stupid. I mean, no, that's wrong, because you can't do that in a relational database. You have to have an intersection table. And here I am drawing the diagram in the wrong way that I said you're not allowed to do. But I'm doing it to illustrate a point. Okay? Point is, Entity Framework will let us commit this kind of sin. I mean, propose this sort of a concept. But believe me, I wasn't actually lying. What we'll see is that when Entity Framework creates the database using code first, it will supply that many-to-many intersection table. Okay, so that's basically the scenario. So let me just come into, I've just made a start here. I just started a new MVC project called Many-to-Many. And all I've really done here is I've added some models. So here's my team model, right? So public class team. I just added the, of course, data annotations in the component model namespace. So I can mark here required and display name and string length for the team name, as in our diagram. And then here's the collection of players, a navigation property, the internal I collection of player objects. And of course, player itself is on the receiving end of that one-to-many relationship. So hence we do see down at the bottom here our team ID, that's the foreign key. Not absolutely necessary to have that, but it's kind of helpful at times. And there's our public team, right? So that's the navigation property to go back to the parent team the player belongs to. So that's the typical way we've set up one-to-many relationships in the past. Everything else in here is just according to our model, right, where we have a primary key public int ID. I threw in a full name summary field, so to speak, just so that I can actually use that in the user interface. And remember how this works. There's only a getter, no setter, because it's read-only. It's just deriving from the other properties of the class, right? So we have our player first name, player last name, our date of birth, which you notice I did not make nullable, right? Or I would have had to put a question mark here to make a nullable date time. So focus is on, finally, there's the last line, right? Right inside the player, because remember, this is our model, right? Player can have many bats, a bat can be used by many players, and it's a many-to-many relationship. So it makes sense then that inside the player class, we would have an I collection of bat objects we'll simply call bats. And when I come to the bat class, not the Batmobile, the bat class, of course we have our primary key, our ID, just a bat name, a string, max string length of 50. And then here is our I collection of players. So we just have navigation collections going back and forth. Just to highlight the difference again, with our one-to-many team to player, sure, we have a collection of players belonging to the team, but in the player, on the many side of the relationship, we just have a single team, the team the player belongs to. So we can go ahead and do this. It seems counterproductive, or it seems the opposite approach that you weren't allowed to do. And Entity Framework allows us to do a model basically saying, okay, my bat will hold a collection of players that are authorized to use the bat, and the player will hold a collection of bats that the player is authorized to use, right? And that's essentially how it goes. So what we're going to do now is, of course, I'm going to need a few other things, right? I've got to have a connection string in the for the database. Hang on. So I will just come in here. There we go. M2M entities, right? There's my connection string just going to a local database in my app data folder called M2M, right? And away we go. So that is all set. I need to have my data contacts created. So normally we come up here, we'll make a DAL folder following the typical pattern of approach we used last term. It's not a fancy folder, it's just a folder. DAL. And inside there we need to make a class. Now, of course, I want to give the class the same name as my connection string, right? Right click. This is kind of review for you if you haven't done this in a little while, right? Okay, add class. And my class will be M2M entities. Very good. Okay, now of course we want this to inherit from DB context. And it's going to say, what the heck are you talking about? But of course we can just add using system.data.entity, and that solves that problem, right? Now, to populate the context class, I'll just do a bit of copy paste magic here, right? We have a DB set for player called players, we have one for bat called bats, and we have our teams DB set. Of course, it's not quite sure where to find these, so we'll just help out a little bit here using our many-to-many.models, right? Remember, we put this in a separate folder. Now down here I am setting up a few of the options, conventions, so to speak, for our data model. So I do have to add some more usings here. Model configurations, and away we go. So I'm removing the pluralized table name convention, so the tables will simply be called player, bat, and team, not with plural forms. And I'm removing the one-to-many cascade delete. So if you go to delete a team and there are players, I want you to be prevented from doing so by default. Okay, so those are the two conventions I'm removing there. And now our context is ready. So let's think, what else do we have to do? We have our context, we have our models, we have our connection string. Yep, looks like we're ready. So let's go into Tools, Library Package Manager. So basically what we want to do is we want to enable the excuse me, migrations, right? Now this is kind of a neat trick. It helps if you spell it right. E-N-A-B-L. So if I just say enable migrations, it might even work, but I don't think it should. Hang on, we'll see. Okay, more than one context was found, right? Because there's the one there to support our ASP identity system. So it tells me exactly what I have to do. I have to say enable migrations, context type name, our DAL M2M entities, right? So basically this command right here. I'll just copy that, come down here to the console, bring it up a little so you can see it. Okay. And now I execute that. Checking if we can, and away it goes. And where's my Jeopardy music? I need to have that play while we're waiting here. Dee, 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 dee. Okay, enabled. There we go. And so it's created our migrations folder, add our configuration file here, right? So we just need to populate the seed method. So following the sort of the template here, we can do that quite quickly or fairly easily, right? I'll just once again do a little bit of copy paste magic perhaps, and away we go. So I'm just going to add some teams. Now of course there's some usings I'm missing here. So just for the models, that'll get our team, player, bat. Now it knows what we're talking about, right? And we should be okay. So I just added a couple teams. Hey, I'm not a sports guy. Aren't the Blackhawks a baseball team? If not, don't shoot me, okay? All right, and then we have 3 players I'm adding, just, you know, some basic information. Oh dear, copy paste, they all have the same date of birth. Oh well, no big deal. And 3 different bats. Wonder Boy, if you've ever seen that movie, it's a great movie, I love it. The Natural with Robert Redford. Anyway, I can't remember the name of the other bat. the little boy carves. But anyway, you can fill me in later on that. And a couple other names for bats, right? So we just have a few in there so we can populate some sample data. All right, I think we're almost ready to go. So let's add a migration. And I'll call it, well, why not? Initial create. Okay, doing that down in the package manager console. Bada bing, bada boom, up. Okay, we have a problem. Oh, yeah, you do need to spell things right. Migration. I kind of missed the T. See, if I was doing this in front of you guys, you would stop me and say, Dave, wait, you typed it wrong. M-I-G-R. Okay, I think I'm okay. And let's see if that works better now. Okay. Yes, so we have our initial create migration here, and ooh, look at this. Look what we can learn from looking at this. So we're creating a table called bat, right? Primary key is the ID, etc., etc. We're creating our table called player, right? And we're creating a table called team. That's all expected. Ah, see, I lied, but I didn't lie. Entity Framework says you can do this, but reality is when it goes to even create the database, look what it did. Creating table, player bat. Yes, of course. The classic intersection table, notice, just the player ID and the bat ID, those are the only two fields contained inside this table. They make up a composite primary key. Look at that. So you only have one assignment of a bat to a player. Makes perfect sense, right? We don't need a separate programmer's key really, and we can do without that. The combination of the two foreign keys makes a good primary key in this case, as well as of course setting up as foreign keys and so on. So, all right, see, I lied and yet I didn't lie. So we're ready to actually make the database. So I'll come down here to the package manager console and let's update the database. And unless I spelled it wrong again, it should work. Running seed method, look, okay. Now come up to the app data. I'll click the don't lie to me button. And there's our database. I can double click. Let's have a quick look inside. Look at all these tables here. Migration history, that's to help code migrations keep track and make sure the database is in sync with our model. So we have bat, we have player, we have team, and there's our intersection player bat. Now we will actually have data in these, right? So if I right click, I can show table data. See our players listed that we created. Forgive me, a drink of coffee. Okay, and our bat table and so on. Same idea, we can see all this data. Now, of course, there's nothing in here yet, right? Our player bat, we have the table, but there's no actual relationships defined. I didn't try to do any inside my seed data. That's okay. That's not a problem at all. So now we have the database set up with a many-to-many relationship. We're all set to start working with this. So how do we go about doing that? Well, there's a few things involved, right? I can close these for now. I don't think I need any of them open. I probably could have done that in an easier way. But coming back to Solution Explorer, let's suppose that we start with a controller. Okay, let's just make a standard player controller. We're going to follow that tutorial online there that shows how to do updating related data in a view. But we'll have to get the basic controller in place first, so I will add a controller. And I will choose an MVC5 controller. By the way, I'm using 2013 here, but you could do all this in 2012. It works exactly the same way at this point in time. So I'll do add, give it a name player, and the data context is my M2M entities. Class is player, PPP player, and just add. That's good. So we'll create our controller to create some views for us, and then we'll have to just start modifying them. Now, one of the things we're going to require to work with this many-to-many relationship, it's kind of nice as long as you have a limited number of sort of lookup values, in this case like our bats, right? Then we can use a very nice interfaces as shown in that tutorial. I put the link up. A nice interface is to have a collection of checkboxes. So you can individually check off which ones you want to be using, right? So that's exactly what we're going to do. Now to accomplish that, it gives us a chance to make good use of a view model, right? We quickly talked about view models. I think with at least one section I did a little example of one, but the idea is a view model is just another class. Nothing fancy about it. It's a class. It often is derived from or similar to some of our model classes, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a class basically to hold any kind of information that we want to propagate out to the view. So in this case, I'm going to actually make a separate folder, right? So I'll come up here, we'll add a folder called View Models. In case I have more than one, I can keep them all organized here. Oh, this is awful. Oh, wow. Okay. So, View Models, I'll add a class. Add class. Now, the name for the class, you have to be a little bit careful because remember, it wasn't until we saw the code to be executed to create the database that we saw it was going to make this player bat intersection table. So you want to just be careful. If I went player bat, because really that's what this is kind of about, this view model, I could possibly run into conflicts because I've got, class the same name as, maybe if I end up working with a DB set of objects based on that at some point. It probably wouldn't be a problem, but I always try to keep an eye out on giving some unique names to things so you don't possibly end up colliding with names. Namespaces can be a real pain then if you have to deal with that. So I'm going to call it player bat VM for view model. Okay. All right, so there's my class itself. Now, what are we going to put inside here? Well, not much really, just essentially information we would track about a bat being assigned to a player, right? So I'll have the bat ID, which relates to the ID property, the primary key of the bat itself, a spot to store the name, so we can kind of load that into the view model, and then when we send the data to the view, we can use that to display it on the page, right, inside the view itself. So we want to have the names of the bats. And then just a Boolean, right, assigned, couldn't think of a better word, kind of the word they used in the tutorial as well. So it'll be true or false, checked or unchecked, 0, 1, however you want to think about it, right? So whether the bat is assigned to a given player. So this will belong to a player. So we'll make a collection of these for the player, him or herself, right? A collection of their player bat view model objects. Okay, one for each bat that's assigned to them. Okay, so let's just save all that. I'm going to do a build, haven't done one in a while, and we're going to get ready to start using this. Okay, now there's a few things I'm going to have to do then inside the player controller itself, right? I've got this view model I made to help me keep track of the bats assigned to a given player, but I've got to, for a player, populate that collection of these view model objects. So I'm going to come into the controller here. I can do it at the top, I can do it at the bottom, I can do just about anywhere I want. I typically put additional methods at the bottom. It's not right or wrong, it's just how I usually do it. So let me just talk about this code I just pasted in here, right? Populate assigned bat data. Fancy name for give me the bats, right? I pass in the player that I want to get the bat collection for. Bat collection, there you go. Right, so we just create, we get from the DB set of bats, all the bats, and then what we're doing for performance, we use hash sets of the actual IDs of the bats that the player has, right? And we create a list of our view model objects. So, oh, by the way, there's some underlines going on here. Why is that? Well, it's because I don't have a using for the view models folder. If I had been lazy and just made the view model class inside the models folder, I wouldn't have this as a problem, but it's pretty easily fixed with adding a using at the top of the controller class. Okay, So we make a list of the view model objects, right? And then basically for looping through all the bats that are in the database itself, right? We're going to add the bats into our view model, each bat, right? And assign it the bat ID as long as it contains, right? If the player bats contains the bat ID. So when we get the player, it already has its internal collection. Remember that? Let me just pull my model up here again. So the player, right, has this property down here. It's iCollection of bats. So that's all the bat objects, if you want to call them that, that are assigned to the player. So that's already in here, right? And that's what we're getting here, player.bats, okay? And we're just pulling them all out, and we're just storing the ID of every bat assigned to the player in this bar here, playbats. So if playbats contains, if that hash set contains the ID of the bat that we're looping through all the bats and checking, then that assigned will be true. If it doesn't contain it, assigned will be false. So at the end, our view model will contain basically an object for every bat in the system. The ones that were already assigned to the player will have this set to true, or 1, and the ones that don't will have that set to false, right? This Boolean assigned. So we get all the bats, and they're defined as true or false. We just throw that into the view bag, right? .bats. So that gives us a chance later on to actually loop through and show all the checkboxes, and we'll know which ones are assigned and which ones aren't. So we can fill the checkboxes in. Okay, now we're going to start focusing on using that from within Edit, right? That's exactly the same approach that our online tutorial, so I might as well follow that. Of course, we have 2 action results, one for the get for Edit, which initially gets our Edit page with the current status information for the player in this case, right? So we have to make a little bit of modification here, because using the .find here, it doesn't include everything that we want. So we're going to get our player in a slightly different way, right? So I'm going to get rid of this code here, and we're going to put in code that is going to work for us. Oh, excuse me. Now just copy and paste it in. Okay. So it gives me a chance to include the bats to make sure that's eagerly loaded in. Okay, the where clause takes care of identifying the one and only player, and .single makes sure that we return a single player. And then as long as we actually find somebody, right? If not, then we're going to return a not found HTTP error message. But as long as we do, then we come on down here, we fill the view bag, so we have the select list, so that we can actually show a drop-down list of teams. But we also have to do one more very important thing in here. We have to populate our assigned bat data, right? So we'll just call our little method that we added a few minutes ago, populate assigned bat data, passing the current player that we plan on editing. So that'll just put all the bats, the collection of bat view model objects, into the view bag as well. Okay, now to show them on the screen. Here it gets a little bit interesting. You probably notice even copying and pasting. Of course, we have to come down here to views and player and edit. It's the edit view we're going to work with. Okay, now when we, sorry, I'm just going to make as much screen space as possible. When we copied and pasted the code out of the tutorial, it messes it all up because the indentation and so on. Just because this tool is so good at, well, it tries really hard to be good at, you know, fixing all the indentation and everything, but it gets really confusing when you're mixing in and out of Razor code. So we can't blame it all. We can't blame it all on the tool itself. Some of it is just darn challenging because of the different ways that we do formatting. So let me just get the code. I'm going to come in here right after the team, the drop-down list where we select the team, and before then we actually have our submit button. I'm going to put the code in here. Now, sure enough, yeah, it messed it all up on me. Even copying and pasting it out of my other file. Okay, so I just fixed up the formatting to make it look as it needs to now. But other than just it not indenting properly, the biggest problems were it wants to do this, right? Put each of those on its own line. So it's just a matter, for the most part, of coming in, selecting the white space, taking it out, right? Select the white space, take it out. That way you get these back on the line. So it can jump into the script and back into the HTML of the page and back into the script and so on as it needs to. But once you get it all set up, by the way, this is a little different from the tutorial. The tutorial showed the course ID because that was also useful information, like PROG1440. Well, the BAT ID is not useful information, so I just took that out. So we're just showing the BAT name. But it's the basic idea as well is that we're just going to loop through. What is all this about, this business? Well, that just is using the fact that we only want 3 columns. If we run into more than 3 columns, then we want to loop back down and start a new row in the table, right? So it's just using the modulus function. If it divides by 3 evenly, then I know we've used up all our 3 columns, and we add a new row we start, right? Okay, so we just are adding basically checkboxes. Notice that the name is selected bats, so every checkbox has the same name. Hey, that goes right back to our first web course, web programming course, where we learned that checkboxes in an HTML form, if they all have the same name, then they get passed as a comma-separated set of strings. Okay. All right, so that should basically allow me to work. Now, of course, this will present it. Let's see if it actually works. Before I do that, let me just come down here. We know about the shared view, so I'm going to come into layout. I could have just replaced the home controller, but that's kind of cheating. So I'm going to just come in here and add a couple of navigations, right? One for player, players, so the index of the player controller, and then I'll do one here. I'm going to anticipate I probably want to add new bats just so I can see more checkboxes show up. So I'll say bats. Now if I click on this now, I don't have the controller ready, so I'll just get an error message, but that's okay. While I'm in here, I only want to edit it once. So just to give some extra navigation, right? Okay, so let's just try running this. And, oh, I should have got my Jeopardy music. Okay, so here's my web page. Notice a nice responsive design. Right, there's my player bats menu. I can make it wider, whatever. And then now I have it up here. So I go to players. Drum roll. I should have got my Jeopardy music. Okay, there we go. Our list of players. And if I click edit on one of them, see? I did mess up my copy paste. That TR has to be right behind that at symbol there. No problem. I'll just leave the page here for a second. Come down to Visual Studio. Let's fix that view. Oh, I don't have it open. Where's my Solution Explorer? Edit. So I missed one somewhere. Where is it? Here. Okay. There. I'll save that. And let's just try refreshing this page. There we go. All right, bats assigned, and there they are. Wonder Boy, Hard Hitter, Slugger. Okay, so I populated the view model with all the bats. Of course, none of them are currently assigned, and that's fine because I wouldn't expect there actually are no intersection records in that intersection table. I can check them off, but I'm not set up to actually save them yet, so that's okay. It just won't have saved it. And if I go back in there, see nothing was saved. But yeah, it's working. Okay, so we're going to fix up a few things here, and as we go along, I'll just maybe minimize that for now. All right, so that is the view. Now let's come back to our player controller. So, because what happens, of course, is after we make changes, we want to come in and change the post for the edit action result, right? So here is where there's a few more changes involved. The tutorial really promotes a try-catch approach here because really we have multiple changes to make, right? So I'm going to, just to save a bit of time, I'm going to basically just put the code in place here. Oh, I'm running. I've got to stop. I can do that. Okay, so edit, post, right. Okay, so we've gone back to just grabbing the ID of the player. And then here, this is coming from our array of checkboxes, just standard HTML checkboxes. It presents itself as an array of strings called selected bats, the name we gave to each checkbox. Okay, so just first of all, we're going to pull up the player again, make sure we eagerly load or include the bats for the player that has been edited. And then we're using that try update model, right? The tutorial explains a bit about that. You can certainly read some more. It's a way of checking, and notice we can do the whitelist approach as well, that we're only going to allow these fields to be updated. And that's perfectly fine because that's all we have to update for the player. So we're going to try update model, and as long as it works, then we know we're okay. All right, so then we have to update the player bats, and we'll get to that in a moment. So we pass in our array of strings, selected bats, and the player to update as well, which we pulled out with our link query up top. And then we set our entity state to modified, save changes, and we're all happy. Okay, a couple things I do have to add a using for this one. Use system data entity infrastructure. Okay, because that's really what we're going to be looking for most likely is a retry limit, because it's going to do it as a transaction and retry it automatically a few times because there's multiple stages in this save operation. Isn't that amazing? Entity Framework does transactions for us and we don't even need to have to worry about it. Okay, and then notice though that if it can't update the model, perhaps there's a validation error or whatever, then of course we want to put the edit page back up again, so we have to populate the view bag with our select list, and of course, didn't mean to actually change that. Call again our populate assigned bat data. Alright, so what we're missing is this update player bats. So this has to be a new method that we're going to add as well. So I'm going to come way down here, just because I usually put the new methods at the bottom. Here's where we added our populate assigned bat data. So maybe right above it, I'm going to add our other new one. Okay. And away we go. Okay, update player bats. Okay, so we pass in our array of strings and our player to update, right? And here's where it's kind of neat. First of all, if there's no checkboxes were checked, then this will be an empty array, right? So if it's null, then what we have to do is assign to the collection of bats that belongs to the player in the player class an empty list, right? We just make a new list of bat objects with nothing in it. And that essentially clears the list, right? And then that's it, we're done, because there were no bats selected. And if there were bats previously selected, they'll be removed. And Entity Framework is smart enough to notice that the collection has changed and remove them for us. Okay, now here is where it gets more interesting. There were some bats checked, right? So we have to pull out a few things. We're going to, excuse me, again, just using a hash set for efficiency because we have to search through it or loop through it. Our selected bats hash set will just be a collection of the strings in our selected bats. And then our player bats is the integer value, the IDs of the actual bats currently, before our edit, were assigned to the player, right? So player bats are the ones that he already had assigned. So we loop through all the bats in the system, going db.bats, just pulling it from our db set. Okay, and so we consider each and every bat, and one thing is going to be true or the other. Either our hash set of strings of the names of the bats contains, or sorry, not the names, the IDs of the bats, contains the ID of the one we're considering. Okay, so it previously was assigned to the user. Okay, that's good. So if it still does, the logic. All right, think about it. Basically, you have to loop through all the bats, check if it was assigned and now isn't, then we're going to remove it. If it wasn't assigned and now is, we're going to add it. If it didn't change, we don't do anything, and we just leave it alone. And that's what all this if stuff accomplishes. So that will update the player bats, basically just adding and removing bats from the internal collection, the I collection of the actual player, right? And Entity Framework is smart enough to do all the manipulation in the intersection table for us so that the bats are related to the players appropriately. Okay, so now we should be able to actually save changes we make in the edit page. So, whoop, I'll bring that up again here. And we'll just go to our players. And now if I edit, let's edit Fred Flintstone. Okay, we're going to assign Wonder Boy and Slugger. Those are the two bats that he can use. We'll save that. Right. It'd be nice to see them listed here. We'll get to that in a minute. But if I go back into Fred Flintstone, there it is. It remembered which ones were selected. No, let's take away Slugger and add Hard Hitter. We'll save that. Fred Flintstone, go back in, and we see it's saving all of our changes as we check it. Isn't that fun? Yeah. All right. And back to the list. Okay. Well, to save, this has been a long enough video. Gosh, we're over half an hour. So I'm just going to cut to the chase to the end, and we'll talk a bit about the code itself. Okay? So the next main thing here was creating, right? So in the create, all we really have to do is populate our bat data. So we have all the bats being added to the view bag, whether they were previously assigned to the player or not. And then when we post, actually, of course, they couldn't have been assigned because we're creating a new player. Forgive me. Okay, so it'll just give us a list of all the bats, but none of them should be selected. But that's okay. So we just call our create for posting. So this is when we get the data back that's been filled in. And it's very similar to what we did before, but we just have code right in here just to add the bats to the collection. So it's very straightforward because we know that there were no bats. It's much simpler process than when we were editing it, and we might have to add some and remove others. We just basically add all the bats that were checked off, right? So just for each bat in selected bats, okay, we just basically do an add. That's what it comes down to. And then the rest of it is more or less the same. Just remember though that if we are returning the page due to validation errors, we have to make sure we prepare the assigned bat data for its display as well. So that's it for the create. Now the other thing we did in here, just for a little bit of fun, right in the index, right? We didn't have to change anything in this code because we already were including everything in the player. Actually, I should add the include, come to think of it. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so just see it works without doing this, but by eagerly loading, it just will save, it'd be better for performance. It will save some time. It won't have to go back and ask for the collection of bats. So we didn't absolutely have to do it, but it's a good practice. And then in the view, I just made a couple of changes here so that in the actual player index, let's get that up. Notice I decided to just use that full name, my summary field, because the index is, hey, read only, right? I don't need to show first and last name separately. I do in my edit and create, but I don't for just the basic index page. So that saves me a column on the screen, right? And then that way I can add my bats used column right here. So to do that, this was actually very easy because it's already in the collection, in the model. So my item, as I'm moving through all items in the model, the item itself has a bats collection. So I just using a for each for all the bat in the bats collection, just showing the name of the bat. Simple as that. So just give me a nice little list there. Okay, so let's just see that in operation. Actually, I think I already have it open in the browser. So here's my index page now, just player, using the summary field, bats used. So I can see that for Sam Smith here, I've assigned these 3 different bats. Fred Flintstone has the 1. And I just, well, on the break there, I added a bat controller. Didn't do anything, it's just the standard controller. So I added another one here, Ramrod. Let's create another bat. Sure hitter. Okay, we'll create that bat. Okay, so we're going back to the players. So if I go in and, well, let's actually add a player because we can test our create. So I added the same code here. Look at that. My new bat is there available. I've got my 3 columns of bats. So first name, David Stovall. Date of birth, wouldn't you like to know? Team, I play for the Blackhawks. And let's say I'm Ramrod, Sure Hitter, and Wonder Boy. Those are the 3 bats that I'm authorized to use. Create that, and see, they're nicely listed there just by looping through the bats collection inside the items as we're looping through, making each row in this HTML table from the items in the model. Pretty straightforward. Okay, I will post the code of this working example here so you'll have a copy of it, and you can watch this video over and over again to your heart's content. Take care, guys. Hope this helps.